أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. In the name of Allah, the most compassionate, the most merciful. Verily, all praise is due to Allah. We praise Him, we seek His aid, and we ask for His forgiveness. We seek refuge in Allah from the evils of our own selves and from the evils of our own actions. And whomsoever Allah guides, none can misguide. And whomsoever Allah leaves astray, none can guide back to the correct path. Ashhadu an la ilaha illallah wa ashhadu anna Muhammadan abduhu wa rasuluhu sallallahu alayhi wa sallam. We testify there is no deity worthy of our worship except for Allah, who is alone, with no partnership. There never has and never will be another. And we bear witness that Muhammad, peace and blessing be upon him, is the last and the final prophet of Allah. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuhu. Brothers and sisters, friends and family, everybody tuning into the live stream, and everybody joining us for the Zoom meeting. Just like Rahim for joining us for another Sunday discussion, where we will be continuing the reading of Those Promised Paradise by Noura Durkee. And today we're going to be going into the chapter regarding Jafar ibn Ali Talib, radiallahu anhu, where it mentions first that I saw Jafar in Jannah with two wings stained with blood, and with his feet died. And this is a reference in Al-Tirmidhi, reference 6153. So Jafar ibn Ali Talib, Jafar ibn Abi Talib, was the brother of Amr al-Mu'minin, Ali ibn Abi Talib, as we had spoken about a couple, it was either last week or the week beforehand, and who took him from his dying grandfather and raised him along with his many other children. He was highly respected and was one of the leaders of the Quraysh. Despite his stature, he was quite poor and could barely support his large family. Yet Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala blessed Abu Talib's adopted nephew, Muhammad ibn Abdullah, with riches when he married the wealthy Khadija. And one year, a severe drought afflicted the Quraysh and all the people of the desert as well, killing the camels, the sheep, and the goats, and forcing the people to eat anything in which they could find, even rotting bones. And Muhammad ﷺ and Khadija could manage because they were able to buy food wherever there was. However, the difficulties of the other people made them very sad, and they tried to help in any way of which they could. And at that time, there were few in the Quraysh more wealthy than Muhammad ibn Abdullah and his uncle Al-Abbas. And Muhammad said to Al-Abbas, "Oh, uncle, your brother Abu Talib has a lot of children. You can see people suffering from thirst and starvation. Come with me and let's offer to take some of his children. And I'll take care of one and you take care of one." "You have a good and generous heart," replied Al-Abbas. And they went together to Abu Talib and said, "We want to take some load off of your back and take care of some of your children until this distress comes to an end. And leave Aqil to me," he said, "and do whatever you want." So Muhammad ﷺ took Ali under his custody, and Al-Abbas took Jafar to join his children, and Ali remained with Muhammad ﷺ and became part of his family. And he grew up with his daughters and Zayd, whom he regarded as a son. And when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala chose Muhammad to be the carrier of ﷺ, to be the carrier of the religion of guidance and of truth, Ali and Zayd were the first boys to believe in him. And Jafar, on the other hand, remained with his uncle Al-Abbas until he became a man. And soon, however, he became a Muslim and married Asma bint Umayyas, and the two of them joined the caravan of light thanks to the guidance of Abu Bakr as-Siddiq, even before Rasulullah ﷺ entered the house of Dar al-Arqam to teach, and Islam was still a private and secret matter. So Jafar was included regarding a migration to Abyssinia. So when the Muslims began to teach, pray, and recite openly, the Quraysh responded by tormenting and torturing them, men and the women alike. And they were especially angry about the conversions of their sons and daughters of certain noble families, and like Jafar and Asma, and they could not harm them physically for the fear of invoking the revenge of the powerful families. As we had gotten on the topic regarding previous weeks, they would have a promise or feuds would break out because they were under the protection of certain powerful families. So for the fear of invoking the revenge of those powerful families, but they could though make their lives very miserable for them. And these young Muslims try to endure the pain, knowing that the way to Jannah is full of these sorts of hardships. And it was particularly hard not being able to make salah in public, and they could never really perform their Islamic duties while in peace. And the bullies of the Quraysh waited for them at every turn, joyfully attacking them like a pack of dogs. And finally, Jafar ibn Abu Talib asked Rasulullah sallallahu for permission to take his wife and a group of the Sahaba to Habasha Shah, basically to modern day Abyssinia, and Rasulullah sallallahu concerned for their young lives, gave them permission to do so. And it hurt him to see these noble people expelled, leaving behind them the people and the places of their childhood and their youth for no reason other than saying, La ilaha illallah, our Lord is Allah, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is only one Lord. Yet he had no means to shield them from the Quraysh at that time. So he himself was spared very harsh treatment only because of the protection of Abu Talib. And Jafar was placed in charge of the first group of the Muhajirun, heading for Al-Habasha. And although they were being followed, they somehow managed to avoid capture and make their way to the ships. And soon they would cross the Red Sea, heading for the shores of a new country. And there they were settled under the rule of Negus, the good and just king of Abyssinia. And the people there were Christians and were peaceful and friendly towards them. And for the first time since they became Muslims, they experienced security and enjoyed the pleasure of worshiping with nothing to disturb their happiness. However, they continued to long for aspects of their former lives, of their homes, their families, and their loved ones, and most of all, their beloved Prophet. Muhammad. And when the Quraysh learned about the departure of that small group of Muslims to Abyssinia, they tried to catch them but failed. And as time went by, news came from across the sea that the Muslims had found security in their worship under the protection of the king. And the Quraysh could not bear that their sons and daughters were worshiping there, out of reach and out of their control. And they started plotting on how to get them away and bring them back to Mecca. So the Quraysh knew the people of Abyssinia because they used to trade goods with them and from their caravans, and they knew that they were especially fond of their dyed leather goods. And they knew that the king always took advice from the religious leaders who were called patriarchs. And with this information, they began to plan a bribe to get the Muslims back. And Salama, who later became the wife of Rasulullah sallallahu after her first husband died, was in Al-Habasha, Abyssinia during that time, and she told the following story about what happened. And this is the narration that's mentioned. When we reached Abyssinia, we met the best hospitality. We did not fear for our religion. Rather, we worshipped Allah, our Lord, without being hurt or hearing bad things. And when this news reached the Quraysh, they sent two strong men from among themselves, Amr ibn al-As and Abdullah ibn Abi Rabi'ah, to the king with presents of all the things that the king and his people liked from the land of Al-Hijaz. And they were advised to give each patriarch his gift before talking to the king about us. And when they reached Abyssinia, they met the patriarchs and gave them all of their gifts, saying, Some foolish youth of our people came to your king's land. They have left the religion of their fathers and forefathers and disunited their people. And when we talk to the kings about them, do advise them to deliver them to us without asking about their religion, for the nobles of their people know them and their convictions better. And the patriarchs were then happy with their gifts and their bribe, and unaware of the real reasons that the Muslims had fled from their homes, said that they would advise the king. For Amr and his friends, nothing could be worse than the king calling one of us to talk with him. They did not want the king to know about our religion, so they went to the king, gave him the presents which he liked very much, and said, O sire, a group of bad boys from our clan have come to your kingdom. They have invented a religion that neither we nor you know. They have left our religion and have refused to enter into yours. And we are sent by the nobility of their people, their fathers, uncles, and clans to get them back, for they know best the fitna, the mischief of which they have caused. So the king looked to his patriarchs, who said, They speak the truth, sire. These people know better who they are and what they did. Give them back to their people and let them see what to do with them. And the words of the patriarchs made the king very angry. He said, by Allah, I will not deliver one single person before I call them and ask them about this accusation. If they really are, as these two men say, I will deliver them. And if not, I'll defend them and give them my best protection for as long as they ask me to. So the king then called us to meet him, and we gathered before we went and said to each other, the king will ask you about your religion, declare what you believe, and let nobody speak for you but Jafar ibn Abi Talib. Then we went to the king, and he had already called his patriarchs who were sitting on both his right and his left sides, wearing their green cloaks and their cowls, and having their books open in their hands. There we found Amr ibn al-As and Abdullah ibn Abi Rabi'ah. And when we sat down, the king turned to us and said, what is this religion that you invented for yourself, and that made you leave your people's religion and not enter mine or any other? And Jafar ibn Abi Talib stepped forward and said, O sire, we were people of Jahiliyyah. We worshiped idols, ate dead animals, committed obscene things, cut the bonds of kinship, hurt the neighbors, tormented the weak. We remained like this until Allah sent to us a messenger, one of us. We know his family, his loyalty, his honesty, and his chastity. He called us to Allah to recognize his oneship and worship him, and to leave the stones and idols that we and our fathers used to worship. He ordered us to tell the truth, to be trustworthy, to tie the bonds of kinship, to be good to neighbors, to stop committing sins, and stop killing infant girls. He forbade obscene things, telling lies, taking the orphans' money, and accusing virtuous women. He commanded us to worship only Allah with no partners, to make salah, give zakat, and fast the month of Ramadan. We trusted him and believed in him and followed him for what he brought from Allah. We did what he says is halal and stopped doing what he says is haram. Sire, our people tortured us badly to make us go back to idol worshipping. When their injustice and cruelty became unbearable, and when they prevented us from accomplishing the rights of our religion, we came here. We chose you over all others because we wanted your protection and hoped to be treated fairly in your land. The king then turned to Jafar ibn Abi Talib and said, can you remember what your prophet brought from Allah? Yes, he then replied. Then tell me about it, said the king. And at that point, Jafar ibn Abi Talib recited the first part of Surah Maryam, the beginning of the surah which is about Prophet Yahya, John the Baptist, and the powerful words of the Quran exalt and praise this prophet who was very well known to the Christians and very important to them. And when they heard Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's words, the king wept, tears soaking his beard. His patriarchs wept as well, tears falling on their books. And then the king said, what your prophet brought and what Jesus, had brought both come from the same source. And then he turned to Amr and his friends and said, go away by Allah, I will never deliver them to you. Then we went out. Amr threatened us and said to his friends, by Allah, I'll go tomorrow to the king and tell things about them that will fill his heart with anger and hatred against them. I will push him to uproot that. Don't do that, Amr, said Abdullah ibn Abi Rabi'ah. After all, despite their contrariness, they still are our relatives. Never mind, replied Amr, by Allah, I will tell him things that will shake the earth beneath their feet. I will tell them, they say that Isa ibn Maryam is a slave Abd. So the next day, Amr went to the king and said, oh, sire, the people you are housing and protecting say terrible things about Isa ibn Maryam, Jesus. Call them and ask them what they say about him. So when they heard that, we felt more apprehensive and sorrowful than we had ever felt before. We said to each other, what will you say about Isa ibn Maryam when the king asks you? By Allah, we will say what Allah has said about him with not a jot of difference from what our Prophet ﷺ has said, no matter what the consequences. Then we agreed to let Jafar ibn Abi Talib speak for us again. So when the king called us, we went there and found his patriarchs sitting just as we had seen them before, along with Amr and his friend. And when we stood before him, he said, "What do you say about Isa ibn Maryam?" And Jafar ibn Abi Talib said, "We only say what our prophet says about him." And what does he say? Says the king. He says that Isa is a worshiper, Abd of Allah and his messenger, his spirit and his word, which are laid upon the Virgin Maryam, replied Jafar. And when the king heard Jafar's word, he hit the ground with his hand and said, "By Allah, what Isa ibn Maryam brought did not deviate one hair from what your prophet brought." And the patriarchs grunted to express their denial to this, to which the king concluded, "Despite your grumbling." And then he turned and said to us, "Go, you are secure. Whoever insults you will pay for it, and whoever opposes you will be punished by Allah. I wouldn't like to have a mountain of gold for one of you being hurt." Then he looked at Amr and his friend and said, "Give these two men back their gifts. I do not need them." Amr and his friend left mortified, frustrated, and extremely disappointed. So we continued to live in the land of the king, enjoying the best home and the best protector. Next, it mentions about their return home. So Jafar ibn Abi Talib and his wife spent 10 tranquil and secure years under the protective wings of the king. And on the 7th year of the Hijrah, he left the land of Abyssinia with a group of Muslims heading for Medina. And when they arrived, Rasulullah SAW was just returning from Khaybar, which Allah had opened for him. And Rasulullah SAW was so happy to meet Jafar that he said, "I don't know what makes me more happy, the opening of Khaybar or the arrival of Jafar." All of the Muslims, especially the poor people, were as happy as Rasulullah SAW on the return with Jafar. And Jafar was very open-hearted towards the poor and the helpless, and he received the honor of being called father of the helpless. And Abu Huraira was one of the people of the bench, Ahl al-Sufa, who lived in the masjid, had no other homes, and were dependent upon the gifts of others to survive. Along with the others, he knew what it was to be hungry, because there were times when no one had any food at all. He had said about Jafar that Jafar ibn Abi Talib was the best of us helpless people. He used to take us to his house to give us whatever he had to eat, and when his food ran out, he gave us the bag of butter for us to lick the butter sticking inside. And regarding his end, the valiant end, it is mentioned that Jafar ibn Abi Talib was not able to stay long enough or be able to stay long in Medina. At the beginning of the 8th year of Hijrah, Rasulullah SAW mobilized an army to fight one of the Norman tribes, Ghassan, who had captured and killed one of his messengers, a messenger to Kaiser, the head of the Christian Byzantine Empire, who ruled the lands to the north and the northwest. And the Ghassanids were mainly Christian, and there was a risk that they would call out other tribes of Asham, of Syria, or modern-day Syria, and that's Kaiser himself would help. However, it was still necessary to avenge the death of the messenger and others who had been killed in that area. So Rasulullah SAW assigned Zayd ibn Harith, whom he had raised like his own son, leadership of his army, and he gave him a little white standard, a banner, and said to the people, "If Zayd is killed or wounded, then Jafar ibn Abu Talib would be their leader. If Jafar is killed or wounded, then Abdullah ibn Rawaha will be the leader. And if Abdullah ibn Rawaha is killed or wounded, then let the Muslims pick a leader for themselves." And then they went away with the army as far as the pass of Farewell, an opening between two hills to the north of Medina. So when the Muslims neared Muta, a village found in the frontiers between Asham and modern-day Jordan, they found that indeed the Ghassanids had received help from other northern tribes. Also, Kaiser had sent troops from his own force, and the scouts reported that an army waited for them. They had 100,000 troops, not including the support from neighboring tribes. And the Muslim army had only 3,000 men. So the Muslims discussed sending a messenger to Rasulullah, informing him of the size of the enemy force. However, Abdullah urged them forward to fight, restating the resolution of Uhud that they had only two alternatives: martyrdom for paradise or victory for the Muslims, and thus they decided to fight. And when they encountered the enemy, they found that they were vastly outnumbered. The Byzantine forces had incredible arms, armor, and horses armored for battle, and they were drawn up in battle formations beneath their splendid banners, waiting for combat. Even so, the Muslims prepared for their attack. And the battle had hardly started between the two armies when Zayd ibn Harith was martyred. Jafar ibn Abu Talib jumped on his golden Arabian mar and wounded it with his sword, so that the enemy might not use it. Then he carried the standard and penetrated deep into the Byzantine ranks, singing this song. Oh, how good is the Jannah in its approach, so good and so cold are its drinks. And the Greeks, their torment is coming close. Unbelievers with no relationships, when I meet them, it's my duty to fight them. So Jafar must have known as he charged singing into the ranks upon rank of Byzantine and Arab warriors that he had very little chance of survival, yet he had complete iman and the knowing of a reward for fighting in the service of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, the garden of which he could sing of it and be totally brave of doing so. And he continued fighting in the ranks of the enemies until his right hand was cut off. So he took the standard with his left hand, and soon his left hand was also cut. So he held the standard between his chest and wrist. And finally, he got struck that cut him into two pieces. And as he fell, Abdullah ibn Rawaha took the standard and kept fighting until he also joined his two friends in death. And meanwhile, Rasulullah witnessed what was happening at a distance. He saw then a vision, the fall of three great leaders, and the white standard was given to Khalid ibn al-Walid, and the army drew together to fend off the enemy. And they found a way to retreat from the overwhelming opposition. And that same day, Rasulullah described the battle to the people with tears streaming down his face, for he had lost beloved friends, companions, members of his own household. And deeply grieved, he went to the house of his cousin Jafar ibn Abi Talib and found his wife Asma, who left us this story. And the narration goes as such. So when Rasulullah had come to us, I noticed the sadness on his noble face. I was aware of it, but I did not want to ask him about Jafar for fearing of hearing something bad. He greeted me and said, "Bring Jafar's sons." So I did, and they jumped happily to him and started quarreling to have him each for himself, and he brought them close to him, holding them and crying. I finally asked old Rasulullah, dearer than my father and my mother, what makes you weep? Have you heard about Jafar and his two friends? He responded, saying, yes, they obtained Shahada. Hearing this, she sat down and cried, and when the children heard the sobs of their mother, the smiles on their faces disappeared, and they froze in their places. And as Rasulullah left, he wiped his tears and said, O Allah, make up for Jafar in his children. O Allah, make up for him in his wife. So returning home, he ordered food to be prepared for the family of Jafar for several days. He said their grief keeps them busy beyond caring for their own needs. And that night, to ease the great grief felt in so many houses in Medina, Allah gave a vision to Rasulullah, and his sorrow was much relieved. And in the morning, he told the people in the masjid that he had seen Zayd, Jafar, Abdullah, and other martyrs of the battle. And he had specifically seen Jafar flying like an angel with two wings stained red. And when he went to tell Asma of his vision, she was deeply relieved to hear of the blessed news. So may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala bless all of these brave souls and their family, and allow us the ability to receive equal of that capacity or reward of Jannah. Ameen. And with that, we'll go ahead and close for the reading for today. Just a second to hide on everyone that stuck with us until now. And we'll continue in the following week with Khadija bint al-Huwaylid. With that, Allahumma subhanaka wa bihamdi ashhadu an la ilaha illa anta astaghfiruka wa atubu ilaik. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuhu.